Okay, so what he will be starting with right in the beginning will be nomenclature. Okay, so in nomenclature you will see various different classes of compounds which he will be discussing nomenclature of, and he will also be towards the end discussing nomenclature of heterocyclic compounds. Okay, now I'll be discussing a brief overview of nomenclature, because if we don't know how to name them, we can't go ahead and try to study their reactions, their synthesis, and so on and so forth, right? So you will see that this part will kind of overlap with the part that Singh sir is going to be taking in detail with you all. Okay, now there is a nomenclature system which is called as the Hansch-Widman nomenclature for heterocyclic compounds, and this particular nomenclature system is based on dividing a molecule into three parts. Okay, so you have a prefix name for the compound, you have a root name for the compound, and you have a suffix. Okay, sometimes the root name and the suffix are merged together to form a single component. Okay, what exactly these three parts are supposed to tell you? The prefix in a nomenclature is supposed to tell you which heteroatom are you talking about. What do you mean by a heteroatom, first of all? Exactly. So most of the ringed systems which we study, like benzene, naphthalene, phenanthrene, anthracene, and so on and so forth, are all called as carbocyclic rings. Why do we call them as carbocyclic rings? Because they only consist of carbon, and whatever valency is unsatisfied, it is being satisfied by hydrogen. So they are all carbocyclic analogues. Okay, as soon as you replace one of the carbons with another atom, an atom other than carbon and hydrogen, we call them as heterocyclic compounds. Okay, so usually routinely the atoms which will feature here are nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, boron, phosphorus, and so on and so forth. Okay, in this chapter, basically your TYBSc syllabus, we will only be looking at three heteroatoms. Okay, which are they? Sulfur, oxygen, nitrogen. We are only concerned with three heteroatoms in the TYBSc program. But remember that if you replace a carbon atom with boron, or with phosphorus, or with selenium, or with tin, or any other atom apart from carbon and hydrogen, you will still be calling it as a heterocyclic compound. The only requirement being it should be in the form of a cycle. Okay, it should not be a linear molecule, it should be a cyclic molecule. Is that clear? Okay, so this prefix name is going to tell you something about which heteroatom is present. Sometimes you will have simple heterocyclic compounds which just has one heterocyclic atom, one type of heterocyclic atom. But there is a possibility that you could have both nitrogen and oxygen together in the same ring. There is a possibility that you could have sulfur and oxygen in the same ring, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this prefix will do justice to all the heteroatoms that are present in your ring. Okay, what the root name tells you is, the root name tells you whether you're talking about a three-membered ring. Can you have a two-membered ring? You can't have a two-membered ring, right? The smallest polygon possible is a triangle. With 2 points, you can just make a line. You can't enclose it in the form of a polygon. So the smallest polygon possible is a triangle. So the smallest membered ring that is possible is going to be a three-membered ring, right? Three-membered, four-membered, five-membered, six-membered, seven-membered, and so on and so forth. Is that clear? So this root name is going to tell you that whether we are talking about a three-membered ring, four-membered ring, five-membered ring, and so on and so forth. Is that clear? The suffix name tells you whether the compound is the completely saturated analog or the completely unsaturated analog. What do you mean by that? When I draw a six-membered ring which is completely unsaturated, what do you call this compound? This is benzene, right? Say for example, if I hydrogenate all of these bonds, I get this, which is cyclohexane. Okay, so this suffix name is basically going to tell you whether it is the completely unsaturated analog, which is benzene like, or a completely saturated analog, which is cyclohexane like. In very, very colloquial broad terms, this is how you can analyze what the suffix name tells you. Okay, only that if at all I put a nitrogen here, this becomes the pyridine ring, and when I put a nitrogen here, you will have a different suffix name for the first compound and for the second compound. Can you see that? Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to distinguish whether I'm talking about This compound or this one, because there is a hydrogen. Do you understand that? So for both of them, the heteroatom is the same, the size of the ring is the same, so there should be some part of the nomenclature that should differentiate the first compound from the second one. Which is that part that is going to differentiate the first compound from the second part? The third part of the nomenclature, which is the suffix name. Is that clear? So your Hantzsch-Widman nomenclature is basically going to revolve around these three. Okay. Now let us look at what are the prefixes that we give. Now there is a reason why I am writing it in this particular order, O followed by S followed by N, because this is essentially the priority order for the heteroatom. Okay, oxygen has a priority over sulfur, and sulfur has priority over nitrogen. Now technically, when I am discussing this chapter with you, you will not be requiring this much. But remember that when you go back to nomenclature, you will get to nomenclate compounds such as this. Something like this, which have more than one heteroatom in the heterocyclic ring. But here in this chapter on heterocyclic chemistry, we are not going to be discussing such compounds. We are just supposed to discuss compounds which have only one heteroatom in the ring. Are you following that? But still it is a healthy practice to follow oxygen, sulfur and nitrogen, so that simultaneously you are also considering your nomenclature chapter. You are not violating any of the rules of your nomenclature. Is that clear? So when oxygen and sulfur are present together in a heterocyclic ring, oxygen will get a priority over sulfur. You getting that? So you will get the first prefix as oxa, okay? Because oxygen is getting a priority over sulfur. And needless to say, even the numbering will start from the more prior atom. So if I want to number this 6-membered ring, I cannot start the numbering from sulfur. Because oxygen has a priority, oxygen will get the number 1. Okay, before we go to this, remember that in a heterocyclic atom, always the heteroatom gets the position 1. Okay, so if you have pyridine, you can't start numbering anywhere you like. Like in benzene. Do you have any fixed first position for benzene? You don't. All positions are absolutely equivalent. So any position could be position 1, any position could be position 2, till you don't introduce a substituent, right? So in case of benzene, all these positions are absolutely equivalent. But in case of pyridine, all of them are not equivalent. And according to our rules, IUPAC rules for nomenclature, the heteroatom must get the lowest locant. That is obviously 1. So you start numbering from the heteroatom, and you could either go clockwise or anti-clockwise in this case. But say for example, if I introduce a substituent CH3 here, then necessarily you will have to go through this fashion so as to give the lowest locant to the substituent, which is a methyl group. Is that clear? So these are the broad general rules of nomenclature for these heterocyclic compounds. Okay. Now for oxygen, the prefix name that we give is oxa, thia and aza. Not exactly. It is more so based on the occurrence of such kind of compounds and so on and so forth. Okay, because you will see that almost all the atoms apart from carbon are arranged in a particular priority order. If you want, you can go back. It's there even on Wikipedia. You will see that each and every atom is assigned in the order of priority. In fact, even though I have written only oxygen, sulfur and nitrogen, in that list which is given, you will see there are many elements featuring between oxygen and sulfur as well. And there are many elements featuring between sulfur and nitrogen as well. But because in TYBSc course we are dealing only with these 3 heteroatoms, I am restricting myself to the 3 heteroatoms. Is that clear? Okay. So you have the prefix names as oxa, thia and aza. Now you need the root names, right? Now the heterocyclic compounds that we will be discussing will either be 5-membered or 6-membered. Of course, there are heterocyclic compounds which have a 3-membered ring, which have a 4-membered ring, which have a 7-membered ring, and so on and so forth. But in our chapter on heterocyclic chemistry, we only discuss two different types of heterocyclic compounds which are either 5-membered or 6-membered. Okay. Now for the 5-membered rings, the suffix name happens to be ol. Okay. Now if I combine, always remember in nomenclature, when there are two vowels which are coming back to back with one another, we drop one of the vowels. Okay. You call it as butene. Okay. You call it as butadiene. Why did you drop the A from buta when you are calling it as butene? You don't say butaene, right? Do you write it as butaene? No, you don't. You write it as butene. But as soon as a diene comes, as soon as a D comes, you retain the A. Do you see that? These are very, very fine, kind of rules of IUPAC which tell us how to nomenclate. So whenever you have two vowels coming back to back with one another, we always drop one of the vowels and we retain the other one. Whereas if there is a vowel and a consonant, we retain both of them. Like in case of butadiene, A and D. D is a consonant, A is a vowel. Therefore, we retain the A in the root name. Similarly, when you have aza and ol, O is also a vowel, A is also a vowel. So we drop the A when we write the name of this compound. So this compound is called as azole, not as azaol. Do you realize that? Okay. So we drop the vowel whenever we feel that there are two vowels which are coming next to one another. Is that clear? So if I draw a 5-membered ring, with nitrogen which is completely unsaturated, the nomenclature of this compound, IUPAC nomenclature of this compound will be azole. Okay. This suffix name, like I told you, will be different for a completely unsaturated analog and will be different for a completely saturated analog. So if you have ol, then it is the completely unsaturated analog. Okay. So oxole, thiol and azole will all look like this, 5-membered ring with a heteroatom. Oxole will contain oxygen, thiol will contain a sulfur and azole will contain a nitrogen. Is that clear? Whereas if you have a completely saturated analog like this, what is the common name for this compound? Have you come across this compound? There are two types of structures for carbohydrates. What are they? One is a 6-membered ring with oxygen, the other one is a 5-membered ring with oxygen, right? They are called something. Something nose structure and something nose structure. Furanose and pyranose structure, have you heard of that before? Okay. This compound is called as tetrahydrofuran. So when you have a 5-membered ring with oxygen for a carbohydrate, you call that as the furanose structure. So fructose has a furanose structure, whereas glucose can have a pyranose structure, because a 6-membered ring with oxygen, the common name of that compound is pyran. Okay. So this is a very good solvent in organic chemistry called as tetrahydrofuran, THF. This compound is THF, right? So if you have an oxygen, a completely saturated analog, how do you nomenclate this compound? You identify the heteroatom. The heteroatom is oxygen, so the prefix name will be oxa. Since it's a 5-membered ring, it has to have a root name of ol or olane. Is it completely saturated? Yes, it is completely saturated, and therefore the name of this compound according to IUPAC nomenclature will be oxolane. Again, I am dropping the A because A and O both are vowels which are next to one another. What about this compound here? पांडुरकर अंकल भी आ गए हैं। हाँ हाँ उनको बोला ही है। हाँ। What about this compound now? Thiolane. Okay, first identify the heteroatom. What is the heteroatom? It is sulfur. So the root name, the prefix name should be thia. It's a 5-membered ring which is completely saturated, so it should get a suffix name of olane, so thiolane. Okay. The only difference you will find even when you're doing nomenclature is that whenever you have nitrogen in the heterocyclic ring, its suffix name for the completely saturated analog is different from all other heteroatoms. Nitrogen holds something special over here during nomenclature. Okay? You will not call this compound as azolane. That's not the name we give it. So remember that where is the disparity? What is the exception to the rule? All other heteroatoms will follow this rule, that it will have an ol as the suffix if it is completely unsaturated. It will have an olane as the suffix if it is completely saturated, except for nitrogen. In case of nitrogen, you will have a special suffix. It's called as olidine. And remember that this exception will hold for each and every ring size. So you'll have a different name for nitrogen in the 3-membered category as well. You will have a different name for nitrogen in the 4-membered category. You'll have a different name for nitrogen in the 5-membered category, and so on and so forth. And this is something that is common to nitrogen in all ring sizes. Remember that. So whenever I'm discussing the rule, then it holds for all other heteroatoms except nitrogen. I'll be discussing the nomenclature for nitrogen as an exception to the rule. Okay? And that too, it will hold only for the completely saturated analog. The unsaturated analog is always nomenclated as per the regular rules of IUPAC nomenclature. Is that clear? The 6-membered ring, which is completely unsaturated, will have a suffix name of INE. Okay? So if you have a 6-membered ring with nitrogen in it, first identify the heteroatom. Which is the heteroatom here? Nitrogen is the heteroatom, so the prefix name becomes aza. Is it a 5-membered ring or a 6-membered ring? It's a 6-membered ring, so it has to have a suffix name. Plus it is completely unsaturated. It is completely unsaturated, and therefore the name should be azine. Again, note that I have dropped the A in aza because I is again a vowel. Nomenclate this compound. Identify the heteroatom first. It is sulfur. So the prefix name for this compound has to be thia. It's a 6-membered ring. Is it unsaturated or completely saturated? It's a completely saturated thiane. Okay, you drop the A in thia, so it becomes thiane. Say for example, I have 2 heteroatoms. Whenever you have 2 of something, what do you add you add di, right? Similarly, you will be adding di. Usually we always specify the positions, because you could have the sulfur atoms on 1,2 positions which are adjacent to one another, 1,3 position or 1,4 position. What does it look like? 1,4. So you'll be calling it as 1,4 dithiane. Do you follow that? There are 2 heteroatoms. Identify the heteroatoms and arrange them on the basis of priority. Which one gets a priority? Oxygen gets a priority over sulfur. So you will nomenclate that first. So it will be oxa, and then the next heteroatom is going to come. Which is the next heteroatom? Thia. So your name will be oxa plus thia. plus, it's a 6-membered ring which is completely saturated, so ane. Now, since you have A and T, a vowel and a consonant together, you will retain the A. But here you have A and A, so you'll drop this A, and the name will be oxathione. Of course, you need to specify the positions, so it should be 1,4-oxathione. Is that clear? So this is how we do nomenclature of heterocyclic compounds. Now, one last thing that we are forgetting is that when we have a heterocyclic compound like this, or even for that matter a heterocyclic compound with nitrogen in a 5-membered ring, there is a possibility that the double bonds could be interchanged. Okay? The double bonds could occupy different positions from the position that you've already written. You could write, what should be the nomenclature of this compound? Let's do that first. Oxa, it's a 6-membered ring, and it is completely unsaturated, so it has to have a suffix name of in. So this compound happens to be oxin. Okay? Now, the same oxin can either be written like this, or it could be written like this, right? Both of them are the completely unsaturated analog. You cannot introduce any more double bonds without causing a positive charge. If I put another double bond here, what is going to happen? The normal valency of oxygen is 2. I'm making it hypervalent. I'm making its valency 3. Then obviously it is going to be associated with a charge. So without incorporation of any charge, the maximum number of double bonds that I can introduce in this 6-membered ring with an oxygen is just 2. But the position of the double bond can either be of type 1 or it could either be arranged as type 2. Okay? Remember that our nomenclature should be absolutely foolproof, right? It should not leave some confusion in the mind of the chemist that whether I'm talking about compound A or compound B. And therefore there is one more additional notation that is given to show what is the position of these double bonds relatively in the molecule. How do we do that? We don't show all the double bonds, we rather show the position where the saturation is present. Okay? If you look at this carbon atom, this carbon atom, this carbon atom, this carbon atom, these 4 carbon atoms, I can either number it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clockwise or anti-clockwise, it doesn't really matter. But the carbon atoms 2, 3, 5 and 6 are unsaturated carbon atoms. Where is the saturation point present? It is present at 4. Therefore, we name this compound as 4H, indicating that at the 4th position there is an extra hydrogen. Can you see that? At the 4th, or in all other positions, there is just 1 hydrogen, like in case of benzene. In benzene, each of the carbon atom has 1 hydrogen, right? But in this case, in this compound, in the 4th position, you have 2 hydrogens. So there is 1 hydrogen which is present in excess, but where is it present? It is present on position number 4. So I call this compound as 4H oxin. A more common way of nomenclature of this compound is gamma H oxin. Again, Greek notation, this becomes your alpha position, this becomes beta, that becomes gamma. So you can either call it as 4H oxin or you call it as gamma H oxin. Okay? So now you can differentiate between the first compound and the second one. The second one will be called as 2H oxin. Can you see that? So now there is no confusion at all. The same thing also happens with a 5-membered ring with nitrogen. You could have the double bonds placed like this, or you could have the double bonds placed in this fashion. Right? The first compound is also azole. The second compound is also azole. So how do you differentiate between the two? You add a prefix. The first compound is 1H azole. 1H indicating that the extra hydrogen is present on position number 1. And remember that according to our nomenclature, the position 1 must always be given to the heteroatom. That means 1H azole contains the hydrogen on the nitrogen. And this compound will be called as 2H azole. These are the 4 heterocycles that you will be coming across in this chapter. That's it. The first one is azole, the second one is oxole, the third one is thiol, and the fourth compound that is drawn out on the board is azine or azine, whatever you want to call it as. The names that we've just discussed are IUPAC names, but when you go to the lab, you don't say give me some propanone, you say give me some acetone, because readily you understand what you're talking about. When you say propanone, it takes you some time to process in your head that you're talking about the same compound which is acetone, which is commonly available in the lab, right? So common names are often much more easier to identify with than the traditional IUPAC names. So we have some common names for all these compounds. The first one is called as pyrrole. Remember that in your exams you could be given either the IUPAC nomenclature, give the synthesis of pyrrole, or give the synthesis of azole. Basically it means the same thing. Just that we can refer it to pyrrole according to the common nomenclature system, or if you want to follow the IUPAC nomenclature system, then we'll be calling it as 1H azole. Is that clear? Pyrrole, furan. Furan for the 5-membered ring, completely unsaturated with an oxygen. Thiophene for the sulfur analog. And pyridine for the 6-membered ring with nitrogen. Now your chapter is divided into a few parts, the first of which discusses aromaticity in each of these compounds. Now till last year, whenever you've had a topic on aromaticity, you've always studied carbocyclic compounds. They could be neutral compounds or they could be charged compounds like cyclopentadienyl anion. It is aromatic, right? Cycloheptatrienyl cation is aromatic. But so far you've never discussed aromaticity in compounds which contain a heteroatom in it. So the first part of your chapter contains detailed analysis of how exactly these compounds are aromatic. Okay. Now, what is the extent of aromaticity? Are they, what is the resonance energy that is involved with each of these compounds? The resonance energy gives us a clue of how aromatic stable they are. Okay. What is the kind of aromatic stability that each of these compounds have? By that we can arrange that which one should be the most stable ring and which one should be the least stable ring, and so on and so forth. Is that clear? So that will be the first part. The second part involves synthesis of all of these heterocycles. So you'll have some common routes of synthesis for the 5-membered rings, and there'll be 2 routes for the 6-membered ring which contains a nitrogen. Okay, so that is about preparation. So the second part involves preparation of all of them, all these 4 heterocyclic compounds. Okay. The third part involves reactions of these compounds. Now, since I've already given you a big clue that these compounds are aromatic, you can expect electrophilic aromatic substitution to come in when we discuss the reactions of these compounds. Just like you've done it in case of benzene, you did nitration, sulfonation, Friedel-Crafts reactions, halogenation. The same kind of reactions are also going to come and feature over here as you move on to the third part of the chapter. Okay, so that is essentially how this chapter is divided. Okay, so initially we'll be discussing a little bit about aromaticity of these compounds. We'll be discussing the saturated analogues, in the sense for pyridine we'll be discussing reduction of the pyridine ring to its saturated analog, which contains nitrogen here. Okay, but however we will not be discussing synthesis and reactivity of such kind of compounds which are completely saturated. We'll be restricting our discussion only to the aromatic ones. We'll not be moving on to the completely saturated analog. Of course, but you also need to know the common name of this compound. This is called as pipyridine. So you have one more compound whose common name is expected of you to know. A 6-membered ring with nitrogen, the completely saturated analog, called as pipyridine. So you have pyrrole, furan, thiophene, pyridine and pipyridine. Is that clear? Before we move ahead and discuss aromaticity, it is very important for us to know what is the hybridization on the atom that we are discussing the aromaticity on. Okay, so any heterocyclic compound has a heteroatom, so we need to know what is the hybridization scheme on that heteroatom to be able to judge whether there will be complete delocalization or whether the conjugation is going to be stopped at some place. Remember that for rules of aromaticity you need to follow 3 golden rules. The first one being the compound should be cyclic, it should be planar. Okay. Second rule, it should be conjugated, and only then you go ahead and look at the Huckel's rule of aromaticity, which says that you should have 4n plus 2 number of pi electrons, right? Now we've already seen that all 4 heterocycles that we've discussed are all in the form of a cyclic structure. The only thing is, if we also establish that they have a planar structure, then we can move ahead and discuss the Huckel's rule. For planarity, it is very important to discuss hybridization, because we know that sp2 hybridization always leads to a planar geometry. Whereas if at all the hybridization scheme changes and becomes sp3 or something else, then it will lead to loss of planarity, because sp3 hybridization is associated with a tetrahedral structure like that of carbon and methane, right? So you will need to be able to judge the hybridization scheme on these atoms. And how do you do that? If at all I ask you the hybridization scheme on this carbon, okay, the basic rules involve trying to understand how many atoms is it linked to. Okay, that's the first thing you look at. How many atoms is the carbon linked to? It is linked to 4 atoms. Does it have a lone pair of electrons? No. Does it have a negative charge or anything? No. So that means it needs to have 4 hybrid orbitals in its valence shell. 4 hybrid orbitals can be obtained by hybridizing 1s with 3p orbitals, and therefore the hybridization scheme for this carbon becomes sp3, right? I could have another species which is anionic in this fashion. This is a carbanion, this is a methyl carbanion, right, to be specific. Now in this compound, in this species, the number of atoms that the carbon is attached to is only 3. You just have 3 hydrogens. But does the carbon contain a lone pair or a negative charge? Yes, it does. It contains 1 negative charge. Okay, so that means it will have 2 electrons which will be lying as unbonded pair of electrons, which is going to give it the negative charge, right? You will need to account for it when you do hybridization, and therefore in all you will require 4 hybrid orbitals, and 4 hybrid orbitals can again be obtained through sp3 hybridization. Moving to a nitrogen analog. Say for example you have the simplest nitrogen containing compound, ammonia. Nitrogen is attached to how many atoms? It is attached to 3 atoms, 3 hydrogens. Does it have a lone pair? Yes, it does. How many lone pairs does it have? Just 1. So it will require 4 hybrid orbitals in the valence shell, and 4 hybrid orbitals can be obtained by hybridizing 1s and 3p. Again the hybridization scheme becomes sp3, right? The key is, when I say see the total number of atoms it is attached to, never count the number of bonds. Like say for example, if I look at benzene and I look at this carbon atom here, okay, the first thing I need to realize is the number of atoms that it is attached to. This carbon is attached to 1 carbon to its left, one carbon to its right, and a hydrogen below, right? It is attached only to 3 atoms. But note that it is forming 4 bonds. But am I counting the number of bonds formed? I'm not counting the number of bonds formed. What am I counting? I'm only counting the number of atoms it is attached to. And this carbon is seen to be attached only to 2 carbon atoms, 2 other carbon atoms, and a hydrogen atom. So while taking into consideration for devising the hybridization scheme, I only take 3 into consideration. Does it have a lone pair of electrons or a negative charge? No, it doesn't have a lone pair, neither does it have a negative charge. So it requires only 3 hybrid orbitals in its valence shell. 3 hybrid orbitals can be obtained by hybridizing 1s and 2p orbitals, and hence the hybridization scheme in benzene for every carbon atom is going to be sp2. Do you understand that? So the key is not to count the number of bonds it forms, but to count the number of atoms it is attached to. Is that clear? Now, by the same logic, now this part will be a little tricky, little difficult to understand, but next time when I have a next lecture with you all on Friday, I'll get the molecular model and we'll actually be seeing how the lone pair is placed as compared to all other p orbitals in the ring. Okay. Now remember that each of the other carbon atoms that are a part of the pyrrole are exactly similar to benzene, right? Right? Each of them is exactly similar to benzene. Now what happens in benzene is that you have a 6-membered ring. Each of the carbon atoms is sp2 hybridized. So therefore there need to be 3 sp2 hybridized orbitals. One of them is going to be projected in this direction, one of them towards the front, one of them towards the back. Try to imagine the benzene ring to be facing you, okay? Coming out of the plane of the board and going into the plane of the board, right? Let us assume the benzene ring to be in that fashion. 2 of these hybrid orbitals will be involved in bonding with 2 of the carbon atoms. One of the hybrid orbitals will be involved in bonding with the hydrogen, okay? But the carbon atom has an unhybridized orbital which is of the p type, right? sp3. There are 3 p orbitals, but the hybridization is involving only 1s and 2p. So that means one of the p orbitals is still left which is unhybridized. In an sp2 hybridized system, when you have the 3 sp2 hybridized bonds, the p orbital, the sp2 hybridized orbitals are directed in this fashion spatially. What is the angle between each of these orbitals? 120 is the angle between each of these orbitals in an sp2 hybridization. The unhybridized p orbital is always perpendicular to the plane which contains the 3 orbitals. Can you visualize that? One of the lobes coming up, one of the lobes going below the plane, right? So you have a 6-membered ring which is completely planar because each of the atoms is sp2 hybridized. Each of the carbon atom will contain a p orbital which is unhybridized with one of the lobes above and one of the lobes below the plane, right? So I can draw that like this. This carbon atom again is going to have a lobe above and a lobe below. So each of these carbon atoms is going to contain a lobe above and a lobe below. And each of these p orbitals also contains 1 electron which is present in the unhybridized p orbital. Okay? When you devise the hybridization scheme, what is the atomic number of carbon? 6. So the electronic configuration happens to be 1s2, 2s2, 2p2, right? We only account for the valence shell. Which is the valence shell? The shell which has a principal quantum number 2 is the valence shell. 1s is going to be inside. So you have the 2s orbital and the 2p orbital. This is the ground state for carbon. According to this ground state, how many bonds can the carbon make? Only 2. Remember that bonding, whenever you are talking about a covalent bond, you are always looking at pairing of electrons. So if you have an unpaired electron, a bond can be formed by pairing up of this unpaired electron and you can have a bond formation. Is that clear? So based on this electronic configuration, you can get only 2 bonds because there are only 2 unpaired electrons which are present on the 2p orbitals. And hence you go through to a excited state of carbon. Now why is this favorable? Remember that bond formation always releases energy. To break a bond, you need to supply energy, right? You need to give energy to break a bond. And whenever bond forms, it is going to release energy. And energy releasing processes are always thermodynamically more favorable. And therefore, the carbon will be pushed to an excited state so that it can form maximum number of bonds. And what is the maximum number of bonds carbon can form? It can form 4 bonds based on unpairing of this 2s electron. Once it gets unpaired, this electron will be pushed to the empty p orbital. The hybridization scheme is devised on this excited state of carbon atom, as we've already realized that the hybridization is sp2. That means these lobes which we've drawn perpendicular to the ring, each of them contains 1 electron, right? So each of these electrons will form a cloud of electrons on top of the ring and a cloud of electrons at the bottom of the ring, leading to the aromatic stability of this compound. Do you get that? So what all are we looking at? We are looking at cyclic, we are looking at planar and conjugated, and finally we are looking at the magic number, the Huckel's rule, wherein we need 4n plus 2 number of pi electrons, where n should be a whole number. Remember that if you apply 4n plus 2 is equal to 4, you will still get a value for n. I know that you've all passed your 12th standard and you know how to solve such kind of equations. You'll take 2 on the other side, okay, 4n is equal to 2. So n is equal to 1 by 2. So fine, I've got a value for n, right? So what's the big deal? The deal is that n cannot hold any values between 0 and 1. You should have a whole number value for n. Only then will that number be called as a Huckel number. And therefore the smallest Huckel number is 0, is 2 actually. When n is equal to 0, if you substitute n is equal to 0 here, you will get the number of pi electrons to be 2. So the smallest Huckel number is 2, and the next Huckel number will be where n is equal to 1, and that value will come to be 6, right? So there is nothing between 2 and 6 which is allowed. Okay, what is allowed is either 2, 6, 10 and so on and so forth. So those numbers are called as Huckel numbers. Do you realize that? Okay, just like we've discussed aromaticity in benzene, similarly these 4 carbon atoms will also contain a p orbital which will have lobes above and below, because these 4 carbon atoms are exactly similar to the 6 carbon atoms in benzene. Each of them are sp2 hybridized, with 2 of the sp2 hybridized orbitals forming 2 bonds here, and 1 of the sp2 hybridized orbital forming a bond with hydrogen. So it is exactly alike to this. But the only problem being that these 4 are overlapping with one another, are in conjugation with one another. But what happens to the lone pair here? The conjugation so far is not absolutely complete. You usually write benzene with a circle inside, right? Let's look at the hybridization scheme for this nitrogen. What should be the hybridization on the nitrogen? sp3. How is that? We need to first look at the number of atoms it is attached to. It is attached to 2 hydrogens, one on the left, the other one on the right, and it is attached to a hydrogen. The total number of atoms it is attached to is 3. Does it have a lone pair or a negative charge? Does not have a negative charge, but it contains a lone pair. How many lone pairs does it have? 1. Okay. So if you count all of them together, the hybridization scheme for this nitrogen works up to be sp3. Okay. If this nitrogen was sp3 hybridized, then there is a break in conjugation. How many of you get that? There is a break in conjugation because you would say that a compound is in conjugation if each of the atoms are sp2 hybridized. Only then they are said to be in conjugation with one another. Okay. Now, because I don't have the models today, I'll be showing it to you on Friday as to how exactly the molecular shape is going to be if the nitrogen was sp3 hybridized, and what would happen to the shape of the molecule if the nitrogen became sp2 hybridized. Okay. So what happens is that this molecule assumes an sp2 hybridization on nitrogen, so that this lone pair also happens to be in the same plane as the 4p orbitals, and hence there could be a complete delocalization of the electrons to form a pi electron cloud on top and at the bottom of the ring. So remember that the atom, the heteroatom also, even though traditionally it looks like it has an sp3 hybridization, you will come to realize on Friday that it actually assumes an sp2 hybridization. Okay. Now only then can you account for a complete delocalization of electrons and the aromaticity. So all of them are completely delocalized to form a pi electron cloud above and below to give you an aromatic sextet. Okay, we'll continue our discussion on Friday.